Well, yeah, cool.
Yeah, so right, good morning again. Um, if you haven't been to a cafe before, I always do, excuse me, always talk about cake or coffee. So I've been really lazy because I am not well, and I've gone and bought donuts, very unhealthy donuts. I read they're 188 calories per donut. My 13-year-old son likes to eat 3 of them, so you can see he's probably jumping up and down all over the place. But has anybody got any tea, coffee, or donuts with them this morning that they can share by going up to their screen? And if they haven't got them with them, next week, Alistair's got the healthy apple. Thank you, Alistair. Anybody else? Because I didn't see everybody there because the joys of bits and pieces. But next week at the Scottish Rural and Island Parliament, we will have cake. So if you haven't got cake today and you're there next week, you will definitely get cake. Anyway, if you're new to the cafes, please use the chat box. It's your friend, okay? If you stay mute at the moment and just introduce yourself in the chat box. And we're all about being positive. The other thing we're asking you to do is in the chat box, just share your postcode, just the first four, two letters and 2 numbers, just so we can start to plot where people are joining us from. It's not about finding out where your home or your office is. It's more about seeing the distribution of where people are globally. And I don't know if he's joined us, but we do have Azrul joining us from Japan today. And we also do have Martin joining us from Germany. So without further ado, just a bit of a refresher for some people and something new for others. Just a bit about SRITC. It was founded back in 2018 and we became a social enterprise in 2021. And many of you will know that we're here about sharing resources, sharing ideas, being supportive and helping out people that are based in rural areas, not just in Scotland, on all things transport. Most recently, if you're on our news bulletin list, which comes out every 2 weeks, you'll have seen that we've published our gathering report. The gathering was people in Botegarten near Aviemore back in May. And the report provides an overview of what happened, who spoke, who did what. And it was a great couple of days, getting to actually see and hear lots of great stories from people. And I know many of you were there that are joining us. So that if you want to have a read of that, it will be on our website shortly. As I said, I'm keeping things short this morning because of my voice, but just a couple of things to put to you. We had a cafe last month, which was very much focused on 3 communities, and Stuart joins me today as one of those. There's been some real progress for one in particular, and Stuart can tell me in the chat what's happened since the cafe for him. But Liz, who is one of our very supportive communities within SRITC. She's based up the west coast of Scotland in the far north. She's been able to take forward quite a few different options with regard to transport. She's had, I know Duncan's here, conversations with Duncan, etc. So it's been really useful. And David and Aberdeenshire as well are making use of some contacts that they got from the cafe. So I really thank everybody for helping those communities, and we look forward to getting updates from them. As an organisation, we have a report that we published last year, which has got 6 big asks in them. And one of them is about procurement. And as a result of that, we've set up with all our volunteers that we have a procurement action group so that we can start to help progress that big ask that we've got. As I've mentioned, we've got the Scottish Rural and Island Parliament next week. The transport piece will be on the Thursday at the Jura Village Hall. And Lucas, who you're going to hear from today, will be there next week, but I won't spoil it because he can share what he's going to be doing. And finally, if you haven't had an email from us about your MailChimp preferences, because we send out news bulletins through the software MailChimp, under GDPR, we just need to make sure that you're happy with that. And over the last sort of 4 years, obviously, as we've grown, we need to just double check those bits and pieces. So basically, without further ado, I'm going to introduce 4 people, and they're just going to take on, and I'm not going to have to speak. Alex is putting up some polls. These are for our funder, and it's a necessary evil, as it were. So if you wouldn't mind just filling them in when they come on the screen, the speakers will continue to speak like I am doing as they're in front of you. It's just one of those things we need to do. But we have Andrew, Richard, Lucas and David who are going to literally fly through some presentations. Just for technical purposes, Andrew is going to be sharing quite Richard and Lucas's slides, so just please bear with us while he goes backwards and forwards between those presentations. And then we'll have a session for questions and answers, and that's completely in confidence. Okay. Right. I don't know who's John Carr. I'll mute John Carr. Right, I'm going to hand over to Andrew. Andrew, over to you. Is Andrew there? Have I lost Andrew? You're on mute, Andrew, I think.
Yeah, the poll came up just as I was about to press a button, and that screwed up me.
You mean you can't multitask? A man can't multitask.
Not on a Friday morning, I can't.
Right, if you want to introduce yourself, Andrew, and thank you.
Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for sparing the time to come and listen to this. So I'm Andrew Ray. I'm Professor of Engineering at the University of the Highlands and Islands, and just over 4 years ago, I worked with Linda Johnson at the Highlands and Islands Airports Limited to create a project called the Sustainable Aviation Test Environment, where we're so hopefully you can see the screen now, but we're investigating the decarbonising of aviation in the northeast of Scotland and improving connectivity at the same time. So this morning I'm going to cover a few of the kind of the science bits behind it, and then I'll hand over to Richard, who's going to look at the socioeconomic aspects. Lucas will then cover some of the projects that we've been looking at, and then that'll lead into David Walsh from Hybrid Air Vehicles, who's going to talk about one of the specific concept of operations that they've been looking at. So I think we all know that aviation is a small part of the contribution to climate change, but it's a significant one, and it needs to change. And specifically for our region, the Scottish Government included in its Green Deal the commitment to creating the Highlands and Islands as a net zero region by 2040. So that was the impetus for many of us in the region to start putting together a project that would look at some of the options for getting carbon out of the aviation system. So just a couple of the issues here. There's no silver bullet in getting rid of kerosene. So just an example, on the left here is the ATR 72, which those of you who fly between the mainland and the islands will be familiar with. It's Loganair's aircraft of choice for the longer routes, and then a sort of EasyJet A320 on the right-hand side. This is comparing the volume of the fuel tanks for different propulsion media. So on the right-hand side, the grey circle is the volume of the current kerosene solution. So hydrogen has been touted as one of the main answers to the problem, but you can see the size of the green and the orange volumes there are significantly bigger than the kerosene volume. And that means we've got to fit it into the aircraft, which means probably more weight, more volume, more drag, which means we need more thrust, which means we need bigger engines. So we get into this spiral that we've got to try and break out of. And the Aerospace Technology Institute did a study of a possible hydrogen aircraft. This is an A320 size aircraft, and the green blobs there are the hydrogen fuel tanks. So you can see they would take up a significant portion of the aircraft. So there's a massive hit on the payload, the number of passengers we can carry, as well as all the problems that hydrogen brings in terms of generation, storage, and transport, and it will leak from pretty much anything. So there are some safety things we've got to consider as well. On the battery side of things, various electric aircraft have been proposed. The picture here is NASA's X-57 Maxwell project. It was supposed to look like the picture on the left. It ended up looking like the picture on the right, and in the end didn't fly in the way that it was supposed to. So there are significant challenges with batteries as well. And just a couple of examples here. So the picture on the left is if you take a big lithium-ion battery apart, it looks like a collection of AA cells, which is exactly what it is. So each of those connections can be a problem. Each of those cells can fail and cause problems in terms of heat and thermal runaway. And rechargeable batteries don't last forever. And one of the biggest problems is the constituent materials. So some of these materials come from unsustainable sources, and the demand for them is only going to get bigger. Won't concentrate on this graph too much, but it shows you on the left-hand side is the volume density of a fuel, and on the right is on the bottom is the mass density of a fuel. So batteries are bottom left, they're heavy and they don't contain very much energy. Hydrogen has a lot of energy for the weight, but it takes up a hell of a lot it takes up a volume for a lot of weight. So to address some of these challenges, the UKRI and Innovate UK set up the Future Flight Challenge project, which was looking at drones, advanced air mobility, air taxis, if you like, and regional air mobility. So within that framework, as I said, with Highlands and Islands Airports, we set up a project called the Sustainable Aviation Test Environment, which kicked off in, I think it was November 2020, and has resulted in a dedicated facility at Kirkwall Airport in Orkney. So there is a hangar, some office space, and recharging and refueling options for these new aircraft. So the bottom left-hand picture is the charging cable for the battery on electric aircraft. Will be a hydrogen electrolyzer to produce hydrogen, and Kirkwall was chosen because it has all the elements of a modern aviation system. It's got scheduled airline flights, helicopter flights for oil and gas, general aviation, military flights, but it's not as busy as Heathrow. So we can manage some of these test flights within an operational environment. And it has some really interesting use cases as well in terms of connecting the islands in the Orkney archipelago and beyond. And some of you may have seen the publicity from that. So Ampere's hybrid electric vehicle aircraft, the Cessna 337, flew just over 2 years ago, and Windracers did their autonomous deliveries for the Royal Mail, and they'll be back next month doing some further trials in Orkney and up to Shetland. And this gives you an idea of the route network. So on the right hand side, the first phase of the project linked the mainland to Orkney and to Shetland, and we have ambitions to extend that in the current phase, but you'll hear more about that from Lucas in a minute. So that's it from me. So I'll now hand over to Richard. And I think you've got your own slides, Richard.
I have. Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, I'll just share my slides. Just need to put those on full view in just a second. Okay, thanks, Andrew, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to share with you our contribution to the SATE project, we being Connected Places Catapult. For those of you who are not aware of us, we're a technology innovation centre, so we support innovation and work with government, with SMEs, and with the academic community to promote innovation and increases in technology readiness. I'm a senior technologist there, and my background's in transport planning, design and operations. So I'm just going to talk to you today very briefly about the demand modelling work that we've been doing as part of the SATE project. So just looking at the high level, what are we trying to understand with that work? So the geography is the Highlands and Islands primarily, and that's the focus of SATE, although we do within the model consider the rest of Scotland as well. And then in terms of technology, and the key word here really is generic future flight technologies. So we're looking at generic technologies. For example, there's a couple that Andrew also shared there on the right hand side that have been involved either in this first or this current SATE project, hydrogen fuel cell and electric powered conventional kind of retrofitted light aircraft. So that might be one kind of generic type of service that we'll consider. Another obvious one, which some of you may be aware of and is getting more publicity now, is the eVTOLs, so electric vertical takeoff and landing type vehicles, and there's many different types of those that are coming through. And then with our work, we're looking to understand the potential demand for some of these services, future services between existing Highlands and Islands airports, but then also identifying where there's potential routes or demands where there isn't currently airport infrastructure. So the purpose of what we're doing is to develop a high-level demand model with the ability to forecast a likely trip mode shift from existing private and public transport trips to new sustainable aviation services, and as I said, allowing that to consider that for existing airports and for for potential new locations. And on the right hand side, you can see the green kind of map is the zonal structure of the model that's been developed. And on the right hand side is Orkney, which has been split out a little bit more to help understand the detail there. So very quickly, just thinking about the inputs that have gone into the model, we did some primary research. We commissioned a state preference survey with interviewees and respondees from the Highlands Islands community, the rest of Scotland, to help us understand people's propensity and attitudes towards these services. So just to skip over a few figures and understand that, 71% of people said that they would be willing to use a zero emission service. The service that they were presented with was similar to what I shared on one of the first few slides, that kind of retrofitted either hydrogen or electric type aircraft. So similar to a conventional aircraft, that's what they were presented with. And then there's some of the aspects that are important to people. Unsurprisingly, the price is important, the time at the airport, the flexibility, affordability, and so on. And then down in the bottom right hand side, just understanding a little bit around the who. So that would be related to people's income. There was a high percentage from the Orkneys, and those with children and those with access to a car, just to understand that. Alongside that primary data source, we then put in other three main data sources, which was Telefonica mobile network data, and that helped us to understand and provided us with the volumes of car and public transport trips. As you can see on the right hand side there, this type of data is used just to go from the phones that we all have. So that's obviously private data. That data is then aggregated up in the back end from the telecom provider, and to provide aggregate volumes of people travelling to and from different locations. Then we were in touch with Transport Scotland and got information from their Lattice model, which is a large multimodal transport model. And the demand in that was used to validate and cross-check against the mobile phone data demand we had. We then also use skim matrices, which is in normal layperson speak, is providing information about the journey time, typical journey times between different locations, whether you're going by road or by transport. And finally, we used MBI smartphone data, which is available. Again, all go through all various data protection and GDPR issues in order to be shared, but it tells us about catchments areas around airports in this case. And then just the other attributes of the model, we then have to, in some ways at a high level, describe the future flight characteristics, the cost per mile, the capacity of the aircraft, the range, and all those types of things. And similarly for existing car and public transport trips, those were described in order to the model to kind of compare the relative attractiveness of those. So those are the three modes: private, motor vehicles, public transport, and this new service. Yeah, I think that's all for that one. And then putting that all together on the left hand side with the demand inputs I've described, the status preference survey, and that then goes into the model, which then processes that, and then output what at the end of it. What does it help us understand? It understands the potential mode shift from car and rail, identify routes with potential demand. We can extract the top routes and evaluate for their feasibility, and it helps us. There's about 6 different use case types that are considered within SATE, so it'll start to help us understand and explore viability of some of those. And key, obviously, SATE is sustainability is a key part of that. So we can also look at a kind of a high level metrics of comparative CO2 and other emissions attributed to the flights versus the other modes. And this is just a very quick, this is an example output. We're literally just at the stage now of churning out our outputs. So this is, for example, for Kirkwall, and the model presented 10 of the top kind of routes, which were then kind of boiled down effectively to 3. And it's saying, for instance, Thurso appears to be the most unattractive route. So that might be typically currently a car ferry car trip, and that might be attractive for a future of flight service if there was some form of ability to fly that route. Again, this is high level stuff. It's just trying to understand what the options are. The environment that is shown in it is a GIS application that we've put together, and you can see on the left hand side there's also sort of transport infrastructure area, demography, and a bunch of other things to help start to piece together a lot more of the contextual information around this as well. And finally, just looking forward from where we've got to, how could we kind of evolve and grow the capability? We'd like to enhance the model capability to include and factor in a little bit more around the existing aviation demand. Ferries, obviously key, particularly for island services, and eventually comparing the viability of new future flight services in some of the existing ferry routes. Supplementary stated preference surveys to, for example, understand people's attitude to getting into a 4-seater eVTOL as compared with a light aircraft. Developing a similar modelling capability for analysis of generic logistics-based use cases, and then also feeding back and having further conversation with Transport Scotland to see how the work we've done, whether that's valuable and helpful in kind of integrating and painting a picture alongside their existing strategic modelling capability, and also whether the extent to which we're providing help with an evidence base in relation to the Transport Scotland aviation strategy. And on the GIS platform side, which I just mentioned briefly at the end there, potential to explore working with other future flight projects. You may be aware of the KALIS project, which is all run also a separate project working with NHS, looking at logistics deliveries, and also looking within the SATE consortium to see what other data sets, because there's a range of work going on, we can bring in to the GIS platform to really kind of provide a rich contextual picture to when we're considering the use cases. And that's all for me. Thank you very much. I shall share. Oops. And then I think it is over to, is it Lucas next?
It is indeed. Hi. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Thanks, Jenny, Andrew, and Richard for giving me the platform to obviously continue from what Andrew and Richard just touched on. So my name is Lucas Prince, SATE Business Manager. SATE, as Andrew already touched on, is a project that's a collaboration of 13 different organizations in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. And although the facility and the test center is based at Kirkwall Airport, the sustainable aviation environment is really covering Highlands and Islands, and it looks at connectivity across the Highlands and Islands region, covering obviously the northern part, as well as the western part, as well as the Highlands and Islands area. And what I wanted to do, based on what Andrew and Richard introduced, to give you a flavor of what the actual technologies are that we believe will enable connectivity in our region. And just to perhaps state the obvious, we are not looking at flying planes, we are looking at the whole interconnected network across the Highlands and Islands region as part of the regional transport mix. So we constantly evolve our thinking, but what's become more constant is kind of 5 core pillars of sustainable aviation, and how do we see those deploying into our region, that I wanted to give you a flavor of, and I'll expand on next week. So the first one along the left-hand side, and the first 3 really, we are looking at aircraft, but the first brand is low or zero emission 19-seater passenger aircraft that we foresee will be relatively early to deploy by 2027 plus, depending on each of the technologies. Because of our region and the relatively short hops, we think that it's going to be the smaller aircraft types that will first be decarbonized. You can see from the images there, there is an aircraft that's probably quite well recognized in our region. It's the Britten-Norman Islander, and that's a particular project, Fresson, that looks at converting the Islander to hydrogen-propelled aircraft. There's an aircraft, there's a Dornier from Zero Avia, and the one at the bottom, it's a newer type. It looks to you and I as a helicopter, but actually it's a gyrocopter that's developed by a company called Arc Aerosystem. And there's an early design that's already certified. That's a 3-seater, and then the next family of development will be a 9-seater. But you can see that we're going from hydrogen propulsion to electric propulsion for the gyrocopter eventually. You can see that those types of aircraft are quite well suited for the location and the airstrips across the Highlands and Islands region as well. And they are really looking at the intra-island or sub-regional movement of passengers. We're later going to hear from David Walsh from Hybrid Air Vehicles, but you'll see the picture of what looks like an airship, but it's a hybrid air vehicle, lighter than an air. And what makes this technology unique is the fact that it can take up to 100 to 130 passengers, and the capacity for cargo is 10 ton for the initial model. And really the deployment is 2026, so it's literally around the corner. But it introduces a completely new way of moving a large volume of passengers or cargo, or a combi mix. And I'll shortly tell you a little bit more around the study that we've recently commissioned and just finalized that we're going to be releasing out as well. The third strand there from the technology options are amphibious aircraft. Now, obviously, being amphibians, being able to operate from relatively hardened surface or from water, or from water inlets or bays. Again, coming into production 2026 plus, but this introduces a new way of operating from near water location. When we look at Western Isles, Orkney Islands or Shetland, you'll see there's a lot of existing facility that needs to be upgraded. But this is another mix that can contribute to the transport mix, where we're looking and considering various types of aircraft. One that's there at the top is it's Region Sea Gliders. They are quite unique in the way they're looking to certify initially as a boat, because they're going to be flying below a certain height. And they're working on the concept of floating, going into a foil effect and eventually flying. The aircraft below that, which is quite unique, and it's got a ducted fan design, is a technology from Cormorant Seaplanes. And the last one is Warrior aircraft as well. So these are sort of what we would class as 3 traditional aircraft types. But moving on, we're looking at completely new design of what's commonly referred to as advanced air mobility or regional air mobility. So that's the AAM or RAM terminology and abbreviation. And really these aircraft are more electric, and they would be looking for vertical or short takeoff and landing capability. So when you look at locations that do not have an airstrip or can provide a short hops for takeoff and landing, these would be a well-suited aircraft. The passenger capacity is from about 4 passengers, It's a completely new class of aircraft, more of air taxis, and it's all about reimagining the way air travel will become possible, where you don't have to queue for 2 hours. It's literally turn up, hop and go, hop on and hop off service. And the last one that I'm going to be speaking more around next week is around heavy lift drones. And these are conventional and vertical takeoff and landing. Now, this is really touching on the applicability for cargo movement. When you look at those drones, they are by no means small technologies. Some of them have a wingspan in excess of 30 meters and capacity of carrying anywhere between 100 to 250 kilos of cargo. We do foresee these coming into production 2025. Some of the ranges are well in excess of 500 nautical miles, but they really start opening up new ways of moving relatively sizable amounts of cargo across the Highlands and Islands of region. And if I may ask you just to quickly go into the next slide, I'm conscious of the timing as well. These are the sorts of studies that we've been supporting or commissioning ourselves, which nicely segue into what David Walsh from Hybrid Air Vehicles will be talking about. So the one that's about to be released is a study, a concept of operation of the Airlander 10. The Airlander 10 being quite a sizable aircraft, probably around about 100 meters long. We've worked together with Hybrid Air Vehicles and AECOM to actually look at technical and economical feasibility study of how the aircraft can operate from selected locations across the Highlands and Islands. And we've covered, we've looked at Inverness, Kirkwall, Sunborough, we looked at Barra, Stornoway, we also looked at Papa Vestray in Kirkwall. So we looked at all types of operations, and again, the uniqueness of being able to operate from water too. There are several other studies covering amphibious operations, airport design for the new types of hydrogen aircraft and new passenger processing, vertical or starport design as well as advanced air mobility. So there's a series of studies. And what I want to draw your attention to is that all of this work is effectively contributing in shaping the regional transport strategy and the role the sustainable aviation technology will play and starting to play in an incorporated regional transport mix. I would like to use this as a handover to David Walsh to talk a little bit more around hybrid air vehicles, and I'm happy to take any questions after the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucas. Thanks, Andrew. Yes, as Lucas said, my name's David Walsh, and I work in the business development team at Hybrid Air Vehicles. And as mentioned by Lucas, what we're developing is effectively up to a 12 payload aircraft, either in a pure passenger configuration of up to 130 seats, or a combi version of freight and passengers, which is probably the variant that would be used up in Highland and Islands if the region selects our aircraft to operate. So that's basically what we're doing, what we're making. Can I have the next slide? So our vision is pretty broad. It's to be the future of zero carbon aviation. That's a big statement. But what we see where we can be the future is on very short sectors, and not on the long haul operation. So basically we want to be zero emissions by 2030. So the aircraft will be zero emissions by 2030. And how we achieve that, how we get there, is initially we're developing a 4-engine kerosene version of the aircraft, which is currently about 70% of the reduced emissions of a normal aircraft. We're then going to move to hybrid as the hydrogen technology develops, and we will be using 2 electric powered engines with 2 kerosene, and that reduces emissions by about 90%. And then ultimately, hopefully, as the technology develops and we prove the power plants that we have on the hybrid variant, we will go to a 4 all-electric variant in 2030, and that will produce us that zero emission. So that's the sort of 7-year plan, if you like, to get to 2030, so that we are actually a pure zero emission aircraft. Next slide. So basically, as Lucas also talked about, he talked about this the study that we've been effectively doing with SATE. It was funded by UKRI money, and we've had a number of supporters of the project, from Loganair, Highland Islands Airports, Orkney Council, Highland Island Transport Partnership, and also Highland Islands Enterprises. So it's probably not worth going through all the airports, because I think Lucas did cover that. So the next slide, please. The way I'll go back to the actual study, but basically the aircraft, we see that there's plenty of opportunities there. So basically, it's not to replace any current modes of transport; it is to complement all the other modes within the Highland and Islands. I think the key benefit of the aircraft is connectivity, which obviously it can provide, and with the combi variant, it will give you that mixture of passenger and freight connectivity throughout the region. And also, obviously, that there's the tourism element, where getting tourists to the various parts of the Highland Islands is key, but you want to do it in a sustainable way. Again, this aircraft with a zero emissions power plant can do that. And then ultimately, we are looking at developing an Airlander 50 aircraft, which could potentially carry up to 80-ton payload of freight, and it is primarily a freight aircraft. So it'll be key for logistics operations, but also it's key in the renewables sector, where we've got a number of wind farm businesses that are actually looking at using the aircraft to actually effectively move the wind turbines. And this is particularly key, as these wind turbines are now actually getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're very, very obviously difficult to get to where they need to be, whether that's onshore or offshore. Next slide. So we've been working closely with our launch customer, Air Nostrum, which is a Spanish regional airline, on the economic side. They've ordered 20 aircraft, the first one due in 2027 delivery. We're also engaging with Loganair at the moment as a result of the concept study, and we're looking at the economics of operating in the Highland and Islands with them. The key areas that the aircraft can save money is effectively, obviously, for fuel, but it also on maintenance costs and infrastructure costs, which are all quite key and quite expensive for aircraft operations. The maintenance costs are reduced because of the complexity of the aircraft. It's very, very minimal. And on the infrastructure side, this aircraft doesn't need to actually have any infrastructure as such. Just a flat piece of land is all it requires. It can land on sand, it can land on ice, snow, water, and obviously grass or gravel, or traditional runways as well. So it's a very versatile aircraft, and it can effectively fly in and out of anywhere, as long as they say it's got a flat area to land. And that's obviously sea state of a maximum of 3, basically, is where it can operate on water. So it's fairly a versatile aircraft. Next slide, please. So basically, IATA have set a net zero by 2050, but they obviously also are promoting air travel. So there is actually a conflict there. We feel that we can be part of that solution on short sectors and on regional operations, and we can get a lot of those operations to zero emissions. And for the longer sectors, the longer haul flights, where obviously time isn't sensitive, we can provide that 80-ton payload ultimately on the Airlander 50 for cargo operators, obviously removing the need for kerosene burning, gas turbine burning aircraft on long haul routes. Next slide. So just very, very quickly, just to give you an idea of what the technology is, it's basically, it isn't actually an airship, and obviously it's not an aircraft, a fixed wing aircraft. Where it gets its buoyancy from the helium, which is inside, obviously, the balloon, or the bag, we call it. The aerodynamic lift is the actual shape of the hull, and if you look at this on side on, it actually is the shape of an aerofoil. So that's where it gets its lift. And then the thrust, the forward movement of the aircraft is generated by the engines, which obviously by 2030 we hope will be all electric. Safety is obviously critical. It will be to all the standards of current commercial aircraft, and passenger comfort is second to none. The cabin is huge. The windows are big because there's no pressurization. You don't have the problem with your ears popping and such like. And yeah, it's just generally a very, very comfortable ride. It's more like going on a train than an aircraft, really. And that's one of the key selling points I think of the aircraft. Next slide. As I said, versatility, no significant infrastructure required. So as Lucas mentioned, we did look at how the aircraft would operate into Barra, for example, on the beach, and it passed that assessment, no problem. We also looked at Scapa and near Kirkwall. Again, that was an area that passed the assessment as well. So as part of that study, we did look at various scenarios where the aircraft could operate in and out of, to obviously see what opportunities there were up in the Highland Islands. Next slide. They said no paved runway required, no ground handling equipment required. As I said, versatile, different types of landing surfaces can be used. It can taxi its under its own power. It's a very, very simple aircraft to operate, basically. Next slide. Yeah, so basically, as the study showed, we looked at the 7 locations. One of the key areas that the aircraft, one of the limitations of the aircraft is it has to take off into wind. So the wind direction is key there, but it can actually operate as with any other aircraft. It can operate in winds of up to 35 knots, and it can sustain 70 knots as a limitation. Anything beyond 70 knots, you'd have to move the aircraft away from that location, but there aren't that many aircraft really that could survive a 70 knot wind anyway. So it's very much similar to aircraft in terms of wind limitations. And that's one of obviously the key things that people will highlight about the aircraft, because it is perceived to be an airship. It's and it therefore not very stable. This aircraft is very stable, and as for turbulence, it's non-really existent because of the size of the aircraft. You don't feel the turbulence like you would in an aircraft. So again, that's another positive aspect of the technology, really. Next slide. So I think the key things here that we found from the feasibility study was that all the locations that we looked at were all operational for the aircraft. It was considered a success by the various parties involved in the study. It can work within current local air traffic using current airports. One of the key things that obviously Hightrans and Orkney were concerned about was how much infrastructure costs would be required. And we had ACOM do a lot of work on how much it would cost to upgrade the airports to allow this aircraft to operate in, and it was very minimal. Where you got more cost was on things like the water operations, but if it was on an established airport, there was minimal requirements there. Next slide. So I'm just coming to the end now. So really, we see, doing a bit of a sales pitch here, we see sort of 8 wins. It's complementing current modes of transport. From an economic point of view, it will increase air demand in connecting parts that probably of the region that aren't connected by air travel at the moment. We see that it will have a play in sustainable tourism. I know I think places like Isle of Skye are quite difficult to get to, so this would ease the transportation to these type of places that aren't linked by air services at the moment. It will support the renewable industry going forward. The Airlander 50 has an 80-ton payload, and it'll be more than capable of carrying the new technology, the new next generation of wind turbines. Economics are good on the aircraft. There's plenty of cost savings from fuel, infrastructure, maintenance. It's good to the environment. We hope to be zero emissions by 2030. And it can operate in difficult environments in terms of the weather conditions when they get, and obviously it's quite apt at the moment. Obviously, in things like Babette, Storm Babette, this aircraft wouldn't be flying, but then there wasn't many aircraft flying in those sort of weather conditions anyway. It's very simple to operate. It's a non-complex aircraft. It's very robust and it's reliable. So we do, and many of the consortium members do feel it will be a good fit for the region. So that's it really. So thanks for your time.
Great, thank you very much. I think there's a lot there to digest.